Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start the webinar. It's actually a roundtable discussion right now. We wanted to welcome you to this Food Policy Roundtable, Elevating the Community's Voice, hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. My name is Rachel Santo, and I'm a Senior Program Coordinator at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future and the Food Policy Networks Project. Karen Bassrob, who's right here, hello, and Ann Palmer, over there, are also joining me in the room. Today's conversation was inspired by many conversations we've had with food policy councils about the strategies they've employed and the struggles they've encountered when trying to incorporate and prioritize the voices of those most impacted by food systems issues into their work. I will introduce our presenters, and then we'll talk about how today's discussion is going to work. We're going to talk with 5 local food policy leaders who have a variety of experiences when it comes to community inclusion and empowerment. Winona Byman is a registered dietitian and an executive director of the Detroit Food Policy Council. Nathan Valentin, also known as Man in Overalls, is an urban farmer, educator, and community organizer. He co-founded the Tallahassee Food Network in 2010 and remains on the board now, though he is also growing food in Jacksonville, Florida. Natalie Mcgruder is the development director at Eat South, a nonprofit teaching farm in downtown Montgomery, Alabama, where she also coordinates Montgomery Roots, a volunteer council that educates and connects farmers and eaters around building a local, community-based food system. Natalie currently serves as on the diversity and grassroots committees of the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, as the policy liaison to NSAC for the Southern Sustainable Agriculture Working Group, and as a member of the Food Policy Network's Advisory Committee. Holly Freistadt, Baltimore City's first food policy director, began her work with the City of Baltimore in 2010 when she created the Baltimore Food Policy Initiative. This is an intergovernmental collaboration that aims to address food systems policy. She has spent over a decade working on food issues in a variety of contexts, experiences that have provided her with an understanding of the food system from the perspective of a nutritionist, an educator, and a farmer. And finally, Helen Schnoes is the Food Systems Coordinator for Douglas County, Kansas. In her role, she serves as staff support to the Douglas County Food Policy Council, an advisory board to the City of Lawrence and Douglas County Commissioners, and the oldest such group in Kansas. Helen's work is to build a strong, healthy local food system, which has ranged from facilitating public input for urban agriculture policy changes to overseeing the creation of a countywide food systems plan that was adopted this summer. Before we begin, I want to go over a few features of Zoom for those who are unfamiliar with this platform. Zoom is the video conferencing system that we are using today. All attendees are muted and will remain in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. Today's discussion will be organized a bit differently than your typical webinar because in lieu of slideshow or PowerPoint presentations, we are going to have each panelist speak to various questions in the form of a round-robin discussion. We will begin with a brief introduction to the context of each council, and then Karen and I will ask them some questions related to their efforts. After we ask our initial questions, we will open it up to Q&A. But at any point during the conversation, you can type a question or comment into the chat box. You can open the chat box by clicking the chat icon in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. You can choose who you talk to by clicking the gray More button in the bottom right corner of the chat box. And finally, we'll be recording the call today, and we'll send out a link afterwards. Now, before I hand it over to the panelists, I want to explain who we are. The Center for a Livable Future is an interdisciplinary center located at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Our work focuses on the intersection of diet, environment, food production, and public health. The Food Policy Networks Project is one of our projects. The goal of the FPN project is to build the capacity of food system stakeholders to reform local, state, regional, and tribal food systems through effective public policy. We do that through training, sharing best practices, networking with other food policy groups and leaders, and developing and providing food policy resource materials. If you're not familiar with the Food Policy Networks Project, I encourage you to check out our website and sign up for our listserv to learn more. Okay, so now to the interesting part. We will have each panelist give a very brief introduction to their council's membership, level of government connection, and length of existence, as well as any relevant demographic context from their local area. Helen, can you begin?
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm Helen Schnoes. I work for Douglas County, Kansas. We are in Lawrence, Kansas, which is a town of 94,000. County is closer to 120,000, and that's about 10% of the population are in a rural, unincorporated community. The community is University of Kansas, Pascal Indian Nations University. So we have about 40% of our population is between 20 and 34. And beyond that, we're in Kansas, so we're not the most diverse community, but Lawrence itself is about 82% white, with kind of under 5% representation amongst Asian, Native American, African American, and other mixed race folks. So that's kind of our demographic context. Our Food Policy Council was started in 2010. It was a real initiative of one of our 3 county commissioners, and really focused on agricultural land preservation and local market development for agricultural producers. So we put a lot of emphasis on the diversity of different agricultural systems represented at the table. So we have 5 different agricultural producers that are required to serve, representing animal production, specialty crop, direct marketing, small scale, large scale, farm bureau. But then we have other sectors represented as well. We have 23 members that are appointed directly to our council. So we're very closely tied to local government. The city commission appoints about half, and the county commission appoints half. But we have education, different NGOs, our local food bank is on it, educational institutions, health organizations. So that's kind of the background of who we are. And just recently, we've been actually rethinking our structure because of a year-long community engagement process we did with a local nonprofit that's really forcing us to think in new ways about representation and engagement. So this conversation is coming at a really key juncture for our council's development and inclusionary efforts.
Great, thank you, Helen. Natalie?
All right, I'm unmuted. Hi, everyone. I am in downtown Montgomery, Alabama. Our council is a part of an urban farm, which makes the way we do our work a little bit different. And the way we came about was an idea that our farm couldn't really do what it was supposed to do as an education farm without having a policy component attached to it. So we're called Eat South, and we were founded by Edwin Marty back in 2011-12 was when the council came about, a little bit after the farm. And we're made up of volunteer members from our community. So we have folks who are actually doing farming, are farm workers, not with their own land, but working on farms. We have attorneys who work with local social justice organizations and are tied to that community. We have in Montgomery both the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Equal Justice Initiative. So that gives us a lot of young, bright-eyed kind of social justice attorneys that we can recruit sometimes to our council. We have a person who's in the city planning department. So while we were not founded by government, we do have some representation and some support both to the farm and to the council from our city. So we're very thankful to have a positive relationship with our city that doesn't necessitate them really dictating our work, which is really nice. We have connections with the Jewish community from our membership. We have connections to policy on the state level. We have a new member who we're inviting who worked for many, many years in the Alabama State House. So we're very excited to have a little bit more expertise in that area. And we also try and incorporate our farm staff as well. So that ups our quotient to 2 farmer voices in the council. And our executive director is a former Teach for America teacher and educator. So we also have those voices as well. We are not super formal. I think maybe one thing that sets us apart from other councils, we're really just a committed group of people who want to see what we can do in our local community with just kind of small people power. And we work very nimbly for that reason. And we are invited to do things that maybe an official food policy council wouldn't be, because we're just known as good actors in the community. So people like having us around, they invite us to things. And instead of trying to really push always a food policy agenda, we try and really get in where we fit in. So if the community is concerned about a certain area or they're hosting something that's really important to them, then we would ask to be a partner and support them in that, while also sharing our work and education around what is the food system, what does a community-based food system look like, and how does everyone play a role in that. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Natalie. Holly?
I am in Baltimore City. I work for Baltimore City. And we have a three-tiered system. We have the Baltimore Food Policy Initiative, founded in government. And it's an intergovernmental collaboration between the Office of Sustainability, Department of Planning, Baltimore City Health Department, and the Baltimore Development Corporation. And together we work with 12 other agencies in the city. So that's part one. Part two is Food PAC, our Food Policy Action Coalition. It too is really informal. Anyone can show up at any point in time. It's every other month. All is welcome, from residents to nonprofits, academics to retailers. And the newest part, which I will talk more about later, is our Resident Food Equity Advisors, which is it was an application process for residents to inform the city on policy, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. So that's our organizational structure. Our goal is to really look at all aspects of the food system and food policy. For Baltimore City, with food access issues being very significant, a population around 62% Black, 28% or actually 30% white, we really need to be looking at how our policies are informed, created by residents who live in Baltimore City and represent the demographics.
Thanks, Holly. Winona?
Okay. So the Detroit Food Policy Council, we are a nonprofit organization, came out of community action. The Food Policy Council was formed in 2008. Our first meeting was 2009. The Detroit Black Community Food Security Network was really instrumental in writing a food security policy for our city of Detroit. And out of that, it called for the formation of a food policy council. So folks like Malik Yakini and Charity Hicks and many others in the community really worked hard to get us formed. We also were made a part of the city or blessed by the city, so to speak, through resolution. So the city council adopted the food security policy, passed a resolution unanimously to adopt the food security policy, as well as to have the food policy council established. Until 2011, we were an all volunteer organization. 2011, we got our first paid staff member to support the food policy council, which is made out of 21 members. And now we have a staff of 4 full-time staff members. So there's 21 council members, 13 seats are reserved for different sectors to keep that diversity in. We'll talk more about that. 3 are appointed by the city. So we have a health department appointee from the mayor's office, and we think we're just switching that appointee. We think they're going to be out of our new Office of Sustainability, which is really exciting for the city of Detroit. And then we have our city council member appointee, which actually she's one of our founding council members, Catherine Underwood, and she's also a senior city planner with the city. So, and has been instrumental in getting a lot of favorable ordinances passed by the city, favorable for urban agriculture and food in our city. So the city is about 700,000 people. It's an urban area. our demographics, about 83% or so, it fluctuates, of the population is Black or African American. 10% is white, non-Hispanic, or roughly around that. Around 6% Latin, Hispanic population, and 1% we have Native American, Asian, other ethnic groups in the city. And so some of the sectors we have sustainable agriculture, higher education, retail, K through 12, which has been a really great addition to our council. We have a youth member. So that's all baked in right into our bylaws of the folks that we nominate. We have some term limits around people can serve 2 terms to keep fresh ideas coming in. And we, I think I'll stop there too. I don't want to take up all the time talking about the Food Policy Council, but that gives you a picture of it. We're a standalone nonprofit with a diverse council.
Thanks, Winona. And last but not least, Nathan.
Hello? Can y'all hear me? All right, well, I can't hear me, that's funny. Well, hey y'all. First off, I just want to say it's good to be with y'all. And it's great to hear some of these stories from around the country. They're fantastic. And I'm just struck by some of the simple numbers that y'all shared. For instance, in Detroit, your population of Black folks, being over 80%. And I think, oh wow, like the Great Migration was a real thing. In the South, if you're looking at Tallahassee, North Florida, all our towns used to be predominantly Black, but then with the implementation of Jim Crow, then folks fled and went north. And so, our numbers now are around 30% Black, about 65 or so % white, and a smattering of other folks as well. Anyhow, I'm with Tallahassee Food Network. I helped start it. I'm actually living in Jacksonville now, but I remain on the board. And we got started because a group of white and Black folks went to Atlanta to a community garden conference, actually. And we realized that we were both of these racialized communities were having very similar conversations about food and health and access and sustainability. And we weren't overlapping like at all. We didn't hardly know any of the other people's people. And so we said, we've got to do something about that. We've got to find ways to forge relationships and partnerships across that line, because we're doing the same stuff. We're doing very similar work, and it doesn't make sense for us to be living in isolation. And really the roots were quite informal in terms of our network. We have a monthly gathering that has drawn together over 1,400 folks to the conversation over the course of 5 years. And that's just a monthly get together. And there's a core group of folks that have come back month after month, year after year. But there's a lot of new thoughts and ideas in there as well. And those folks represent over 400 different organizations. So that's everything from a neighborhood association to the city of Tallahassee, to the county, to the universities, to businesses, nurseries and farms and things like that. And as well as coalition type organizations. So we have a partner that is a coalition of farmers, an alliance. And so they show up from time to time when the conversation is more about farm to table economic development. And really what we tried to do was foster a space much like the coffee houses of old. So in the same way that you had all of these different scientific disciplines sitting around the coffee house together, hearing their ideas and then critiquing them and often their own insights and backgrounds, we tried to do that around the topic of food. And so you have the health department says, hey, I want to do this campaign about healthy eating. and they're sitting across the circle from a grandma who's been doing healthy eating cooking classes with young people. And you've got the neighborhood association president that says, I'd love to have a farmer's market. And you say, oh, okay, great. Which farmers are you going to invite? And they say, oh, well, yeah, we wanted to talk to you about that, right? Because those relationships just aren't there or weren't there. And it's been fascinating watching the change in discourse over the handful of years that we've been working. From for the first year and a half, 2 years, everyone would come to the gatherings and they'd say, I'm blown away because I didn't know anyone else did this work or thought these things. And that phrase has gone away in Tallahassee. People, whether for good or ill in all situations, but they know each other, right? And so they can call on one another. They can say, hey, you know what? Who would be the best person to talk to about this is so-and-so. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a woman who works in the National Climate Action Network. And she says, you're not dealing with a network if everyone agrees and is on the same page and trying to do exactly the same thing. That's a coalition. So we have aligned ourselves as a network. There's been several attempts in Tallahassee to have a more formal food policy council, and those efforts have largely been not all that fruitful because there were so many issues going on that people wanted to address, like it sounds in Montgomery. The community was pulling on people, and maybe one day it's policy, but next week it's how do we start a community garden, and next week it's how do we do cooking education with young people, and how do we do this, how do we do that. And so the policy was only one aspect of what we did, that we have addressed policy issues as well. I'll stop, I'm rambling. It's super great to be here. Our roots are community organization and social movements and getting people together because they've got their own best answers.
Thanks, Nathan. As a follow-up question, I know when we had talked to you about it before, you mentioned that you had an interesting way of facilitating conversations between the people who come to the Tallahassee Food Network meetings. Can you describe a bit about how do you make sure that a grandma feels comfortable talking next to someone who works for the health department, next to a farmer's market person?
Sure. So in a typical meeting space, in an office or bureaucratic space, the call for introductions is almost always name and title and organizational affiliation. But if you don't have a title or organizational affiliation, you can feel distance from that table, or say like, oh, well, geez, here's the mayor and this person and that person, and what legitimacy do I have sitting here? And so titles do come out from time to time, but we don't emphasize them. And instead we start with a question that everyone can answer. So we've asked over and over again, what are your food dreams? We've asked, what's a family recipe? We've asked, what's your most recent food passion and project and work? And what it does is, it does two things. One is it levels the playing field. Everyone has something to share to that question. And the other thing is it bubbles up these possible partnerships and relational connection moments when people, maybe they're not going to collaborate on a grant, but they say, oh, my grandma cooked that too, right? And so then they get to talk, and the assets, all that community-based, asset-based community development, all those assets get on the table because they're talking about, grandma and where they grew up and collard greens and things like this. Meanwhile, they learn that somebody knows how to talk to the city about getting a business license, on and on and on. So all these little subtle assets come out through conversation. So that's the biggest thing we do, is do introductions. Introductions take 30 or 45 minutes of our gatherings out of an hour and a half. And then oftentimes we have small group breakout sessions and lots of dialogue. And the facilitator is always trying to find ways to engage voices that aren't speaking up, to broaden the perspectives that are at the table, but also being heard at the table.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you. And just a reminder to folks attending and listening, if you have a question, please feel free to use the chat box edit or the Q&A box, and we'll go through questions and ask the panelists as well. Our next question is for Natalie. You guys have just released a new community food assessment and have gone through a pretty lengthy process of putting it together. And the community food assessment is called the Food Turn-Up Report, and it's for Montgomery, Alabama. You also were very intentional about making it community-centered from the beginning. Can you talk about why you were so intentional about this and the challenges you encountered in trying to make this assessment something that people in your community cared about, while also trying to satisfy your funder?
Keep forgetting the old unmute. Yeah, so the food turn up, the very name of it was an effort to rebrand ourselves. So we started out as the River Region Food Policy Council. When I mentioned that we were started along with the farm, that's what we were called. And you know, that's great for some people. Some people are super interested in coming to a River Region Food Policy Council meeting. But for most folks in our community, they would always have something better to do, right? I got to wash my hair. I got to go talk to my dog, like anything but come to a River Region Food Policy Council meeting. So when I came on and was asked to take on the leadership of the Food Policy Council, it was the first thing. I was like, this has got to go. And it was met with a lot of resistance because, you know, people had really devoted a lot to what was affectionately called the RRFPC. But I just kind of made a little compromise and said, okay, we'll keep it there with the name, but for our community food assessment project, we're going to brand it as something that sounds fun, like something that people would be like, if they heard about this meeting, they would actually maybe want to come. So the Food Turn Up was born. At the time, we had a member who was a graphic designer. So I kind of gave her my vision, and she was able to make us a really fun looking logo. And you guys have the flyer, maybe you can show it to everyone, but we created a little handout that they're gonna show, you know, beyond just making sure that things looked appealing, right? Like bright colors, no big words, you know, those were very important things to us, even in how we branded the community food assessment. Before we actually started going to communities, having meetings, sending one single email, we were like, yo, we have to get our symbolism straight. We have to get our colors right. We have to make sure that we're appealing to people beyond words, because everybody doesn't learn with words. So having symbols and colors and other things that share your message can be just as important depending on what type of learner you are. So we use the Food Turn Up as our logo for the assessment process. And this is an example of kind of the end product, the end product. So we had a report that's like 30 pages that we knew a lot of people wouldn't read. But we also made this very fun handout. So it's a two-sided handout. One side gives the three main takeaways in very simple terms that we got from the community's feedback in the assessment process. And the other side has the Alabama-Auburn football schedule. Because when we think about what people in Alabama truly care about in their deepest heart of hearts, it's pretty much Jesus, fried chicken, and football in that order, right? So we had to make sure that if we're coming to talk to you and your community and tell you that you should listen to us for any amount of time, we've got to come correct. And we know that. So one of the things that we did was most of our meetings were held in Section 8 housing projects, most of our community food assessment meetings. And then we also did interviews with various stakeholders in the food system, all Black people. So, you know, just not to pussyfoot around and say people of color, all Black people. So all Black people gave us the information for this report. It was made for Black people, by Black people, very, very explicitly. And not everybody was really into that, unfortunately. So we thought it was really cool. The people we were talking to thought it was really cool. The communities we wanted to share it with thought it was really cool. But the people who didn't think it was so cool was the people who were paying for it. And what they thought was that really the outcome wasn't rooted enough in academia, was the main kind of criticism of many, including my leadership, my, you know, just like a lot of things about me personally, but also just about how the report actually came out, how it looked, and how it read. And, you know, my automatic reaction to that was, well, who are we doing this for? So if you're paying me to go out into the community and you're telling me that these people are living in food deserts and they have high rates of chronic disease, low education attainment, and low income, and so you guys got money from a program in the federal government to reach out to these individuals to help them with these health challenges and to help them have a better connection with food. And then you said that you were going to pay me to spend time with these communities to find out where they actually were in their relationship with food and to try and share some good information that they could use and improve their lives. If you told me all of this and this is why you paid me, then why would a result that is speaking to that community directly in the language and in the colors and in the style and in the swag that they appreciate, why is that now not right, not okay? So, I saw a lot about how race and what is perceived as proper scholarship or what is perceived, I think what Nathan touched on, like we don't just do food policy. And that's one of the reasons why we had to change our name, other than it being super boring, is because we do what people ask us to do. We do what people say that they want. So if people say, hey, I would eat more of those vegetables if I knew how to cook them and make them taste good, then we're going to do cooking workshops. If people say, well, I don't know how to get involved and I've never even done advocacy, then we're going to do advocacy 101 sessions and we're going to do Farm Bill 101 sessions. If people say, hey, I don't have any money and I don't know how I'm going to feed my kids or buy back to school supplies, then we're going to do, cottage food and how to start your own food business on the side, how to sell at the farmer's market so you can make some money. That's the only reason why we're doing it. And so I think ideologically I had a challenge trying to figure out, well, why are these people talking about, well, this is what food policy is and this is what a community food assessment report should look like, but you're not talking about this is what people need and this is what people want. So I'll stop there because I can get really fired up about this, but that was a little bit of my experience in this world.
Thanks, Natalie. That was a great description. And we see in the chat box you got a couple of you rock chats. Just for clarification, can you explain what the relationship is with eatsouth.org?
Yes, so we are, so what was the River Region Food Policy Council is a program of Eat South, which is an urban teaching farm located in Montgomery, Alabama. It sits on about 7 acres. We basically teach people what a sustainable food system looks like, starting from growing our food to our compost. We have chickens, bees. We sell our produce at the local markets as well to some restaurants. And then we have the Montgomery Roots, formerly the River Region Food Policy Council, as our arm that does more of the food systems education piece, food policy piece. We try and stay connected with what's happening nationally, which is why I stay up with NSAC and folks like you guys at the Center for Livable Futures. And then we also stay connected with our Southern regional people, which is why almost everyone on our staff goes to SOG, the Southern Sustainable Agriculture Working Group Conference. So we are formerly known as a food policy council inside of an urban teaching farm that is connected to both national and local and regional food issues.
Great, thank you, Natalie. Next up, we have Helen. So Helen, your council is unique in that you have so many farmers on it. And this includes both voices from commodity producers and small-scale specialty crop or sustainable ag producers. Could you describe a little bit about how this has been part of your council from the beginning? And how do you facilitate conversations between farmers of such different ideologies and backgrounds, and also farmers and other members of your council?
Yeah, definitely. Well, essentially, when our council was just getting started and our county commission was talking about how to form it, our one commissioner who represents a lot of the commodity ag producers in the county didn't want it to just be kind of a local foodie Lawrence thing that kind of existed outside of the full scope of agriculture and food systems in the county. And so he kind of really worked hard to make sure we had that diversity of production written into our bylaws. And then each of our county commissioners has an at-large appointee, and he always had a very trusted leader in kind of the conventional agricultural community serve on that place. And that the woman who served in it for the first 6 years, she served out 2 full terms, really has become a champion of the need for that shared space. But it was a lot of hard, long, confusing meetings that didn't really have a clear endpoint when the council was getting started. It was before I was in the community, but I think those first few meetings, we actually hired a facilitator to help find common purpose. But as folks have talked to, there's so many ways you can engage with food systems work. One of the key points getting started was not looking at the highest points of controversy and hot button issues that are already kind of a fault line in those food systems conversations, but seeing where there's commonality and common interests to work together and find understanding. So early on, the council worked to do a food systems policy tour, so inviting different city staff, policy makers to go to a cow ranch, go to a input or a dealer of John Deere and other tractors, go to a small scale vegetable farm, and really like create a shared experience across those different sectors, so folks could start to see. And by the time we were working on our food system plan, I was in a focus group with a lot of large scale producers with our conservation district, and some of them were like, those people in Lawrence, they don't get us, they don't understand us. And it was that long-term serving rancher that really stood up and said, I know that I'm part of the downtown restaurateur, and I'm part of kind of the other parts of it. So that's been one part of it. But then, we have education and youth and NGOs and other folks serving on the council. One thing that we do is really emphasize shared learning. And so each of our council meetings is at a different location. So end of this month, we're going to the ranch of a new farmer that's on the council. Last month, we were at a winery, and we've been to the Lawrence shelter and to grocery stores, and so we physically move the council around to get people out of their comfort zone and really on the ground. And that's a two-way street with the community too, because then the folks who are hosting us are like, this policy council, like, what is that? Who are you? How am I connected to you? But we have members saying, I would have never gone out to this, ranch. I've never been to the shelter. I see that I could build this program, or like, I never knew how hard, vegetable farmers worked. Things like that have been really, really important to us. But now that we've kind of had this structure that's been so successful in trying to forge those relationships of trust in the agricultural community, I think we still have a lot of work to do, and we have a foundation to build on of the urban-rural divide, and then also some of the racial equity and other things that aren't as easily codified by the economic sectors, and kind of we have generational requirements. We have to have someone who represents senior services, and we have a youth position, but we haven't codified the other sorts of representation. And so the work with a local food justice nonprofit who actually hired 7 community members as community coordinators and actually worked with me for a year to do public outreach and go to the folks they know and come back. It really transformed what our food plan looks like, and I think in the coming months might lead to new structures for our membership and possibly even our meeting structure and how we address that. So we're kind of taking what we've learned from the agricultural, trying to negotiate those agricultural debates and looking at where we have gaps now still too. So it's an evolving process of continually trying to make sure who is and isn't at the table and what we can do to better address that.
Thanks so much, Helen. I'm now going to turn back to Karen.
Holly, so you have the Baltimore Food Policy Initiative, and you now have a resident food equity council, which is quite unique in terms of offering paid opportunities for residents to get involved in some of their community food environment work, particularly reaching out to people of color. Could you describe how the Resident Food Equity Council came about, how it works, kind of your recruitment strategies to bring residents on, and then a little bit about how their involvement has changed your policy work or informed some of your policy work with the city? Holly, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, thanks. I'll just start over. So going back to Food Pack, what we were realizing in the early days, the mission and vision of Food Pack was, because we had these food policy task force recommendations, and they were very ambitious. And I was working for the city very part-time, 10 hours a week at first, on a contract. And so I quickly was like, well, how can I get as many people engaged as possible? So Food Pack originated as organizations with a mission and vision on food, to all get together and to be able to convene and collaborate and show the work that's getting done. And what we saw from who showed up in that room was it was majority white, because most of the organizations with mission and vision on food in Baltimore City was white. So over time, we kept changing or looking at how do we make Food Pack reflect the community and make sure there's all levels of participation. So we moved Food Pack to the evenings, or at least to 4 to 6 o'clock, work groups and workshop stations and Food Pack. And we realized that there was a lot of expertise in the room, and we wanted to make sure that everyone had a choice, more like a focus group or a conversation. And that was a really good start, and our numbers did change, and we were seeing more residents coming back for the second time and third time, but that didn't seem to be enough. But Food Pack was really serving those who came in a way that they were benefiting. So I didn't want to overhaul Food Pack fully. So we wanted to add something new, and we just added it this past December, was the Resident Food Equity Advisors. And the goal with the Resident Food Equity Advisors was really to have resident-informed policy. In June 2015, we released with Hopkins these City Council food environment maps. You can see behind me, actually, the city one. But we did 14 council district maps, and we really want to be intentional to make sure that residents in each of the council districts was represented. So we had a little grant, literally $6,000. So I was like, well, let's see if I can pull this off with $6,000 in a grant. And we put an application out for residents to apply, and we used our channels of Food Pack. But if you already go to Food Pack, you were kind of disqualified, because that means you already had access to policy, access to a certain level of power. We really want to get residents who are not participating, but we wanted to use a network of Food Pack to get more people involved. And so I was literally crossing my fingers and hoping that we would get 14 people from 14 council districts. And to my surprise, we had 80 applicants apply for 14 slots. So we moved it to 16 slots. And of those applicants, it was 50% Black. And our final group of resident equity advisors, let me see what my numbers were here, 13 Black, 2 Latinx, and 1 white. And the way the resident equity advisors work is that it was 6 consecutive meetings. They started in January, they ended in June. You had to commit to all 6. You got a stipend of $40 per meeting, and we provided dinner. And if you did not attend every meeting, or you missed more than 2, you were not going to continue to be a resident equity advisor. And really the purpose was for them to inform policy, for us to also inform them on policy. So it was a two-way street. And I wanted to pull a few quotes here that I wanted to quickly share. One of the questions we asked them at the very last session was, how would you explain what a resident food equity advisor is? And I'm going to give you 2 different quotes here. One is saying, a service-driven city resident who is invested in food equity for all people and who are more than generally aware of the previous and current status of food equity in their district. And the second quote here is, I would define it as a group who are voicing their opinions to influence a decision on issues, I would define it as a group of people who are voicing their opinions to influence a decision on issues of food deserts in Baltimore City and what people face. And there was one thing that, as far as like a really informative moment or aha moment for me, was around 5 years ago, a group of retailers came to the city and said, we really need you to change the SNAP disbursement, meaning the number of days that food stamps or SNAP is dispersed through the city, through the state. It was at 10 days. They said we really need it at 20 days. And we worked really hard. We got it changed so that every resident would get it over a 20-day period. And so we did it. And it took some time to get all the bumps out of the system. And once we did that, the retailers were like, we're losing a ton of money. You know, this is not working. We don't know why the solution that we've seen in the southern states actually is not working in the city. And then it was through the resident equity advisors in one of our meetings around attraction and retention of grocery stores. One resident said it, and then another, and then all of them were saying, the coolest thing happened around a year and a half ago. I was like, whoa, what is it? And they're like, well, usually when SNAP benefits is issued, all the prices go up in the stores. And then it goes back down. And something happened, and we don't know what, but the price fluctuation doesn't change anymore. And this was like this great aha moment because we changed this policy, we did all these things. And the retailers, you know, were showing that they were still losing money. We were trying to figure out why. But it was only through the resident equity advisors and all them explaining all their circumstances that we got a different perspective on it. I mean, it's just different voices on this issue, but it was really interesting to see that. And what we have seen with the resident equity advisors is that we now have this to-do list of reprioritization of different policies or looking things from a different angle. And we continue to work with these advisors in the upcoming year as well.
Thank you. We have a couple of additional questions for you, Holly. How did you advertise the application process for the resident food equity advisors?
So we did that initially a couple ways. One, through Food Pack. Remember, a Food Pack, anyone can come. So we have a list of 70 people on Food Pack at minimum, probably 85 or so. Then we went through all our city council members. They then sent it out to their constituency. And then we also went through all our city comp planners in the Department of Planning, which is where I'm housed, through their whole networks.
Thank you. And a final question, someone asked, would you be able to share the resident food equity advisors, their responses, their application responses? Are you guys, are you doing any reporting with them?
So there's two things. So one, and Karen, maybe afterwards you can share the report that Lily Sussman, and actually you did, on the resident food equity advisor application analysis research. That's all public and done with quotes of why people want to be advisors. We will have released, we're not done writing it, the equity advisor just ended in the end of June. And so we're still digesting the information, but we will have the quotes in a public document, but probably in mid-fall.
Great, thank you. We can share the report or the summary that Lily did.
Sorry, and last but not least, Winona. So even when groups have specific aims to meaningfully include their community voices, evaluation can still be a beast. We hear that your council has started using an equity report card to hold yourselves more accountable to your diversity intentions. Could you describe the process that you recently underwent that led you to the creation of this tool and how you've been using it so far?
Okay, so like I talked about, our council, we really looked, well, our makeup of the city is predominantly people of color, and predominantly of that percentage, Black folks, African Americans. But as the city is going through some changes and a new development, we wanted to make sure that we continue to have involvement from Detroiters who have been in place along with the new. So we wanted all voices to be heard, but not to lose the voices of the folks who have been in the city and working hard and doing the work for so long. And to make sure of that, we went through a process last summer with some consultants, some from Policy Link, other organizations, and they came in and helped us develop a equity tool so that each project or any undertaking we take, we can look at it with a series of questions to look at who pays and who benefits and who, what are we trying to address so that we can be more intentional about this. So right now we are looking at ways to put it in place. But one of the things that it has led us to do is make sure that we're partnering with other organizations to make sure that we talk to everyone in the community. So we have an annual summit. This past year was our 7th annual summit, March 8th and 9th. Next year is our 8th annual summit. But one of the things we did was partner with other organizations. So looking at organizations like our American Indian Health Organization, or some of our largest population of Latinx, Latino, Hispanic population is in Southwest Detroit. So making sure that we partner with Southwest Detroit, making sure that it's made sure that we have our, when we have things, that we make sure that they're bilingual, not only in English, but also in Spanish. It has really made us more, like I said, to be more intentional about that and to really look at it differently, and to keep that question before us, because the Food Policy Council really was started, we had deep urban ag roots, and so to make sure that we talked across sectors, we have those 13 different sectors. We have another thing we have are the 4 at-large council member seats, so that if you're not attached to a particular organization or doing any work, formal work in the food system, but you are a community member who is interested in food policy, in shaping our food system, and making a more sustainable, equitable food system, that you have a seat at the table also. So we take that tool and we look at all of our processes and keep it in front of us. And so we'll be using it more. We're really looking at how we can use it more fully, and how we can even, right now we're doing our food system report. We haven't done one in a while, and we're partnering with the health department. And part of that is, again, using that framework to look at equity in the food system. So not just what's happening, but also is there progress, and to ensure that no one in our community is being left behind as we progress, as we move forward, as things improve, to make sure that they improve for everyone in our community.
Thanks, Winona. We have a question that is to all panelists, maybe one that's in a city government position like Holly or Helen might be best answered, but what are the best kinds of support and facilitation that a city government staff person can provide for an FPC?
So this is Holly. I can speak to one piece. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay. One of the things that we've noticed, or that people have commented that they've enjoyed, is policy briefing. That oftentimes, from city, we want to hear what everyone has to say and get different perspectives and hear from them, but they want to really hear from us. Like, what policies are coming down the pike federally on the Farm Bill? What policies are happening at the state? What's happening at city council? And so we've been trying to do sort of a healthy combination of us being able to brief, especially for the resident equity advisors, and also get their feedback. So I thought that policy and distilling some of the information, or giving them places to get more information, is something that city, we have access to legislative aids and access to a lot of policy updates that we can share.
Yeah, I would agree on that. I think the staff liaison role that I serve on our council allows to do a lot of the really minor behind the scenes work, so that the time of our council members who are volunteers, essentially doing community service, is most effective, so that the idea they had at last month's meeting, I help move the ball down the line so that there's an update or an action that they can deliberate upon the next month, or inviting the planner who's overseeing a potential rezoning or working as kind of the point of contact for learning about the policy context that's of most interest to the council at the moment, in a way that is maybe more direct than if they're kind of trying to negotiate the different happenings of bureaucracy, or who's the best point person. And yeah, a two-way streak for sure in that regard.
Thanks, Helen. So speaking to how Nathan had discussed how he facilitates introductions, someone asked, how did your other groups, the other councils and networks, facilitate introductions and do their work?
So we typically do a check-in, and when I send out the agenda, I will create a check-in question. Usually that's either silly or kind of deep and meaningful, and I kind of alternate between the two. So either I'm trying to pull some heartstrings and just allow people to bring their whole selves into the meeting, or it may be something more fun, or if we've all just come back from summer break or something, what did you do? But we like to involve food and family because people like to talk about those two things, and you get the insight into the person a little bit more than just the boring meeting topics when you kind of broach those things.
And this is Winona. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So one of the things we do at our council meetings, so our council meetings are open, and we have them every other month. And so we always have community members there. And so at the end of the meeting, we open it up and we ask them a little bit about what brought them there, or to tell about themselves and share. So it kind of evens the, again, when Nathan talked about how it brings up partnerships that you wouldn't have thought. So people talk about their interests, and then it allows us to network after the meeting and form new partnerships and make new connections with folks doing work in the community on a personal level, maybe in their neighborhood or on a smaller scale.
So this is Holly. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So we kind of do the combination of the two. One of our goals is to really break down silos between one neighborhood or one organization that's doing something and then another one who's doing a very similar project that may not know. So we spend around 30 minutes for introductions as well and updates. And we really want to hear, whether it's from a resident or a nonprofit or a community organizer, what are they doing? It could be a policy update, it can be a program update, it can be an event update. But we do want everyone from an organization. We only want one person from an organization to speak, not everyone, but all residents definitely speak, so that everyone can start to connect the dots. You can see everyone's head nodding across the room of like writing down who they want to talk to at the end of the meeting. And a sign of a good meeting to me is when no one leaves. When we're kind of like kicking them out because the building is closing, because they're all talking to each other because of these update meetings or updates that they've been learning about what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I'd second that. I agree with you about that. A good meeting is the one where everybody sticks around. And I continually am amazed at how folks are so engaged with the topics that they just can't leave. And we will have ended the official meeting 45 minutes ago and there'll still be 10 or 12 people hanging out.
This is Helen. We periodically dedicate more time for check-ins and why folks are on the council or what they've been up to. But we also have subcommittees for our council members, and I think that's a space, because it's a smaller event or smaller gathering and a more focused and less formal one, where they really kind of get to know each other and get more comfortable with one another on something more focused. So then they relate through that engagement with the full council. But at our retreat we had last July, more opportunities for the kind of informal relationship building was a key interest of our members. So it's something we're looking to build more intentionally into our work going forward, since I think as that kind of formal council, we really spent the first few years kind of figuring out what we were for and why we were doing the work. And now that we have that established, we can kind of step back and kind of reassess how we build the relationships in the community through the council work.
Thanks, everyone. Another question that's come in, and this is just a reminder that attendees can write in questions at any point now. What methods of communications do you rely on for your councils? Email, Facebook, phone, flyers, whatever else you might dream up?
Winona, you go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Without visuals, I can't tell when someone is about to talk out. So sorry, my computer died on me. But yeah, so we use email, we use social media, so Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We just started this year mailing out a paper newsletter because some people really still like something in their hand. And then again, just the word of mouth and having our meetings across the city, because Detroit is such a large city area-wise. It's really spread out, and our transit is not always the best. So we, just again, getting out in the community and being at events and making sure that we're where people can see us and connect with us.
So this is Natalie. I personally, for my members, because we're very small, I will send an email, but I will text them. So I often just have a little text thread and I'm like, hey guys, don't forget, it's the meeting, bring a snack. So that's one of the beauties of having a smaller, more informal council is I can just text everyone. But as far as how we share our work with the larger community, we are super into the social medias. We use Instagram, we're getting into more of the videos. And I really kind of discounted Twitter. So I just want to give Twitter a shout out real quick. I really thought Twitter wasn't that important. And we have a new member, the state policy level guy I mentioned, and he and his wife run an online blog in Montgomery. And he was like, oh, well, why don't you tweet your need for volunteers at the tabling event this weekend at the health fair, and I'll retweet it for you to get some volunteers. And I was like, oh, let me do that. Let me do a tweet, because I never thought about it. And not only did we get a volunteer for the event we were tabling at, it was a back to school health fair. They were giving away free book bags. It was a great opportunity to get up close and personal with our community and share our message. But we got a volunteer off of Twitter, and she's actually the newest member of Montgomery Roots that I have recruited. And because she had that face-to-face engagement with our work in the community, we shared like a farm fresh recipe, and we told people about what we do and tried to get them engaged and signing up for our newsletter. And she just really loved it, and now she wants to be a part of it. So moral of the story, don't forget that Twitter exists.
So for Baltimore, I've always been really quite surprised that we usually send out one email and put it on the public calendar for the mayor's office in the city as well. But we always have a minimum of 40 to 70 people per meeting, which still shocks me. But we did it was a total accidental mistake, or not a mistake, but we thought it was a mistake at the time. We sent an invite via the calendar invites, through the city. So the food pack meeting, it went on to every council member's calendar, along with all other agencies. And anyway, it went to a lot of people. And because usually we didn't have a lot of electeds coming to the meetings. And with this accidental calendar invite, we now have all council members or their staff attending. And we definitely have some state folks and more policy people listening to voices that they would not necessarily be listening to in a large group setting. So our accidental calendar invite to city government worked really beautifully.
Helen, do you have anything to offer, or do you want us to jump to the next question?
I was going to say a lot of what we do has already been covered, but we did have the newest farmer to join doesn't have email and just had a flip phone until he got chemicals on it recently. So it's a new process where everything relating to the Food Policy Council, I'm texting him or calling him, and that's kind of been a fun adjustment to make to force you to have that gut check to not be so dependent on email.
You got thumbs up from Natalie. Okay,
yeah.
So we have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
The issue of communication is a good question to ask. If you're trying to engage diverse audiences, then you're working across all kinds of different lines. And a huge one is our platform little silos. So there's the Facebook crew, there's the Twitter crew, there's the email crew, there's the phone crew, there's the I heard it from Ms. Mitchell crew. And if you're trying to build a network or a coalition or a council across those lines, you've got to be willing to communicate in a lot of different ways. And so what we found is it's not actually, there is no perfect platform. The question is which platforms do you use based on who you want to engage. So if it's a particular neighborhood, you figure out what their tools are and use what already is working. Because if you try to say, oh, well, you know what's awesome? Slack is awesome. And Slack is awesome. but most people aren't on it, so it's not real useful.
Thanks, Nathan. We have a question that says, we have populations of First Nations and Latino folks, but Bellingham is predominantly white. How do we best navigate the inclusion of marginalized communities who are most impacted by changes to the food system when the community that shows the most interest is white? We are seeking to highlight the voice of these groups.
You ask them. I mean, you.
This is,
it's a reactive question, but that's the answer is, if you're trying to engage somebody, you ask them what the cost of recruitment is. Whoever you're trying to work with, they have way more expertise about how to engage with them than someone else that's the expert.
This is Winona. I would agree with Nathan, and really finding out who's already doing work in that community and partnering with them and finding what it is that they're interested in and how you can connect. And like you said, asking questions, finding out what the barriers are, and if, just finding that common connection and connecting with folks who are already doing work connected to the community, in the community, and going about it, especially in a respectful way.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, when white folks are trying to get non-white folks in the work, they really put the burden on them to, hang out with them. And I would just submit to you that, maybe they don't hang out with you for a reason. And maybe that's where you should start, is just figure out how can you get to breaking bread together, much less thinking you're going to invite somebody to a council to give their deepest challenges and painful historical harms to you for the freezy. Maybe they don't want to do that. Maybe it's going to bring up a lot of painful stuff. Maybe they don't like you. Maybe they don't know you. And this is not to be disrespectful to you. This is just to say, this is the kind of brutal lens with which you need to look at yourself and yourself as a council and as a body when you're coming to someone else, asking them to give of their voice. Do you make their voice comfortable? And once again, I forget who the guy is, but it's the number one kind of theory in sales, right? People buy from people who they know, and one other one that I can't remember now. Oh, trust. Trust. That's the important part. Yeah. So if they don't know, like, and trust you, then they're not going to buy from you, regardless of what you're selling. And even if it's just community meetings to talk about food policy, they don't want to buy what you're selling if they don't know, like, and trust.
So I'll second in here just a second as well. The approach, like Winona says, engage with folks that are already doing the work, who are already in the community engaged. And sometimes you don't have those connections. And so you've got to find any way you can in and ask the question. One of my favorite questions in the whole world is, who do you know who is already blah, blah, blah? Who do you know who's interested in this? Who do you know that's doing this work? Who do you know that's mentioned something like this? That right there has led to my own meeting a lot of folks and learning from them. And it's another way to get some low-level commitment. If folks are willing to share some of their network, if they trust you enough to share their network, then that's the first step. And it's a litmus test too, right? If you ask that question and they say, I don't know about, I don't, right? Then what you are hearing is two things. Well, maybe this person doesn't know, and maybe they don't trust you enough yet. And if so, then take some steps back and spend some time getting to know folks.
Yeah, I would like to answer this as well. This is one of the reasons why we created the Resident Food Equity Advisors, is so that we could have a small, intimate, trusted space where people feel comfortable and want to share, and everyone's kind of invested in the effort itself. We found that it couldn't happen in food pack with 60, 70 people. We try in smaller groups, but I feel like that's one of the successes of Resident Equity Advisors. It's 16 people. They meet every monthly every month. And there was a lot of connections and networks that were created from that as well.
Thank you all. So we have one more question, which is kind of if you're bringing on these interested community members to become more engaged in your councils, and they may know something about food systems or they may not, but they have some passion and interest. Kind of what advice do you have for bringing them on, being active members, and getting them engaged at the initiation of becoming members of the council or your network?
This is Helen. A few years back when I was new to working with our council, we were getting a lot of feedback from newer members that they were overwhelmed with what was happening. They weren't sure which projects corresponded to what, and kind of what does policy mean? What's the structure of the government? What actually does this council do? So we worked with one of our subcommittees to develop an orientation framework, and usually if possible in new cohorts, so it's not someone doing it alone, but they're kind of building a group of folks entering the council at the same time. We kind of give the background of what we are, what policy means, and really try to hand them kind of a starting point to make that, to let new members know there's nothing wrong with the question. You're here because your voice and perspective matters. So wherever you are starting from that place, it's what we want to hear. And I think we're still working on that, but it's been a helpful foundation to kind of have a more robust starting point for new members. And then we're also really now more working on what kind of discrete roles or kind of opportunities to have a more defined space for some members, because when you're in a big meeting and there's just lots of people talking, it can be hard to know when's your voice just time to speak up. And so working with members to have that comfort to engage because they have valuable things to share that are important to shaping the work.
I would just say ask them what they are interested in, very simply. Once you find out where people's passions are, what makes them tick, what makes them upset, then you can really get to why they probably came to you in the first place, and you'll be able to also identify where they will be most able to contribute. Because one of the things that I've learned is that you really need for people to contribute in the way that they feel strongest. Once you get to know them, you can try and maybe push them in some different directions that you can see their potential for that maybe they can't even see. But in the initial, you need to build those wins together by really respecting what it is that they say they want, give them the opportunity to work towards that, and then you evaluate, based on that, and let them self-evaluate as well. We're really into self-evaluation around these parts, mostly because we don't really feel like anybody's the boss, and we all know that we don't know what we're doing. So it's great to kind of self-reflect and check in with yourself. So yeah, find out what they're interested in, and I would say right away, activate them in a opportunity to act on their passion, so they can get a feel for you and your group, and they've already gotten invested right away in an activity, in an event, and some opportunity to contribute.
This is Winona. If you could see me, you would see I'm shaking my head because I agree with everything that's been said. And the other thing that we are doing is we had in our retreat for our council members, we made sure that they have a buddy, and so that they have someone to feel connected to. Our executive committee calls folks to just keep them engaged. And then with our subcommittees and work groups where we actually get the work done, and it's a mixture of council members and people from the community and other organizations, we try to make sure, like Natalie said, that there's something, we find out what they're interested in and have them work with us on that. We make sure that our meetings and are productive, that we have goals that we're working towards, so that they still feel connected and that they can see the value of their work, so that they can see that things are moving forward. Because with policy work, it can be very slow when we're working on policy issues. But what are the steps and what gains have we made, and reviewing that and keeping everyone informed via either email, phone calls, text, so that everybody still feels connected. Because as with us, we have the staff, the full-time staff, but so we see each other and we can see the movement, but folks who may be engaged once or twice a month, making sure that they feel connected and see the movement as well, and that is good communication.
Everybody's talking about passion and engaging people kind of where their direction lies. And I'd like to reiterate that through our own experience in Tallahassee, was that when we were first getting started, we were very intentional about doing that from step one to the end of, that was our mode of operation. And to a certain extent, we got away from that for a while because we started a youth farm. We got a farmers market grant to boost up farmers markets in the area. And so we became more programmatic, and it changed the reinforcing network effect that was happening in Tallahassee to some degree, where people came previously because whatever their passionate idea was, they could be facilitated and encouraged in that and get further. And so then they tell their friends and say, hey, if you've got an idea about food, this is the place to come. And it was like a snowball effect. But at some point when people said, oh yeah, I'm really interested in such and such, we'd say, oh, well, we've got this program, you should plug in and, volunteer. Then what happens is we're really channeling their passion into our dream, right? And that's a different thing. It's okay, but it's a very different dynamic than to basically receive people with their dream and send them out again, maybe with an enhanced network to be able to be more effective and impactful. But those are real different approaches. And so even if you do one of the both, it's good to keep both in mind, because we definitely had some bumps and struggles in the past couple of years because we didn't realize we were doing that, changing the kind of the unofficial organization of our network. And we're still dealing with some of that.
Thank you all so much. In the interest of time, and I know that we said we'd technically end this at 2:15, so for the remaining questions, we will copy and paste them into emails to the panelists, and if anyone feels inspired to answer that question, we can pass it back on to the person who asked it. We'll also try to send out, if the panelists are amenable to that, some of the resources they mentioned, including the equity report card, the orientation packet for new members, and the report that Karen and Lily did about the Baltimore Food Equity Advisors. So be in tune for an email follow-up with the link to this and some of those resources. So thanks again for everyone participating, and we hope to see you at our next webinar, probably next month. Thanks.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Keep up the good work, y'all.
Bye.